question is, did you get your moose yet? Did you get your elk yet? Well, I can tell you, during the good old days in the 1960s and the 1970s, when I was in Prince George looking after them, that question came up often in my family. And believe me, after the third or fourth snowfall, the answer was, why? Why haven't we got our moose yet? That's how important it was to us. Moose was our meat for the winter. And my kids were raised on it when we were there. 8 years of living off our moose, and everybody else did too. So the question today is, yes, did you get yours yet? And most of the guys today say, well, geez, I don't know. I don't even know where to go now. But when I was a kid, 15 years old, over on the other side in the foothills, it was always great. You betcha, I got a good one. When I was hunting elk in the foothills of Alberta, back in the 50s and 60s, they were fantastic populations. But they were foothills populations. Well, those days are still pretty good over there, but they're not so good on this side here. Then when I was 50, I was only 15 years old shooting those elk, and believe me, they were fabulous. But when I turned 50, I was lucky to be able to come and hunt my elk over here in the Rocky Mountain Trench. And I've been hunting them there ever since. Well, I can tell you, in my old haunt last year, after 10 days, I never saw a single elk in 10 days. Whereas back in the early 80s, mid 80s, late 90s, on a good day, I would see 100 to 200 elk. I didn't see one in 10 days, okay? So, and in 2016, my son and I were on a September moose hunt west of Babine Lake in the Fulton Valley, which is dear to my heart because it was like a barnyard when I first went there. And in 9 days, I never saw a single moose. Anyway, so we did come to Cranbrook last year to talk about what has happened to our big game. And we got some pretty good answers, but we didn't get all of them. And we're working on some of them right now. So the question is, how many? We always get into that. How many animals have we really got? How many elk? How many moose? How many deer? So we always need a standard or comparison. And the usual comparison is the number of animals per square mile, or if you're in America, or per square kilometer if you're up here in the Kootenays. And so our question is, how does the Kootenay compare with other jurisdictions when it comes to managing their moose and their elk and their deer and all their other species? So we have to make some comparisons, and I've got 4. I've got 2 from Alberta, I got 1 from Newfoundland, which is my favorite, and then I've got, of course, Norway and Sweden and Fenno-Scandinavia. And I would urge all of you, we're going to put it up at the end of the presentation, I would urge all of you to visit some of these websites. There's so much information out there about how people are managing their big game species. You can spend hours and hours at just reading this material, and some of it is outstanding. In fact, some of it is almost unbelievable. In fact, if you want to go to the Norwegian site or the Fenno-Scandinavian site, all you got to do is just Google moose hunting in Norway. And you wouldn't believe the information that comes up. It's done so beautifully, and when you look at the numbers, you're astounded because those numbers come up within 6 weeks after the hunting season. This is an administrative achievement that is unbelievable. We never could do that. But you get instant results, and it's spectacular. So, in Alberta, let's go back to Alberta. The first example of real interest as a standard is Elk Island National Park. Believe it or not, it's a park that's only 75 square miles, or 194 square kilometers in the parkland zone. And it's got a perimeter fence, and it's a big fence, believe me. Okay, so 13 years ago, the Park Service did a survey, which is, thank God they did, because they have a lot of animals over there, and the results of the survey were interesting. They got 605 elk, 300 moose, 500 deer, that would be mule deer and whiteys, and 315 bison. Okay, that was for a total of 1,720 ungulates. And that's a lot of animals. It's a lot of animals. And so when you do the arithmetic, it comes out to 23.2 animals per square mile, or 8.7 per square kilometer. These are high densities, and they brag about it. In fact, the park says we have the highest density of wild ungulates in Canada. And I'll give them that one, because they probably do. However, they say, and this is really priceless, they say, well, no wolves, cougars, or bears are allowed in. But they still have a few meat eaters inside the fence. I don't know how many, but they don't say. But anyway, hunting's not allowed, which is understandable. But surplus animals are trapped and probably used for transplanting elsewhere. And if they get 450 bison, they round them up and sell a portion of them for whatever purpose. In fact, when I was going to school in Edmonton in the 50s, we could buy buffalo meat, bison meat in Safeway. It was wonderful. Anyway, in fact, in 1948, 47 moose were taken from Elk Island National Park and dumped in Cape Breton Island, because there were no wolves in Cape Breton. They got rid of them in the mid-1800s. And so the population they're fighting over who's going to get them now. But this is how they use their animals. The second example is from, again, the Prairie Parkland, which is really a different place, because the Prairie Parkland is a place where people farm. It's an agricultural area. 10 to 40% of the area is still forested with ponds and marshes, with a food supply for moose, and they take advantage of it. However, the thing that I find really fascinating there is that the animals thrive over there in that agricultural area, and it only began in the mid-1900s, like 1995, 96. These animals started to adapt, and that's a word we've got to get to use more appropriately. The moose started to adapt, and so what did they do, okay? They took advantage of a food supply, a really high-octane food supply. They had oilseed, they had legumes, pulse, lentils. This is high-octane food, and as a result, they thrived, okay? But at the same time, the government had to kind of keep the lid on them, because if they were competing with the farmers, they were a bit of a nuisance. But what really is interesting, they became very popular for the hunters over there. I'll give you some numbers. By 2015, the population had increased. In fact, the number of licenses increased fourfold, from about 852 in 1996. And by 2015, they had sold 3,555. Fourfold increase. That's measurable success. Their hunter success was even better. 74.5%. That's fantastic. Okay? And in the boreal forest, it was only 48, which is still pretty good. But the classified counts, as a biologist, you get really turned on by these numbers. 76 calves per 100 cows. That's an incredible number. We never, in all my years, we never got that. But those are wonderful numbers. In the boreal, it was only 4,600. But we know why now. And the beauty of this is, it's not a big population, it's a widely dispersed population, and the area is fairly open, as described. But it's so accessible because of a grid system of roads for farming. So really, it's really a user-friendly area for old-timers like me. You don't have any stuff to climb up and go over. But I can tell you, it's also very, very important to a lot of old-timers over there, because right now, 20% of the rifle hunters, moose hunters, hunt the area. So there's hope for us, isn't there? That's recent. That's just, think about it. 5 years ago, they were getting results like that. So we've got some hope here. But my favorite is Newfoundland. Moose were introduced to the island they tried twice, but in 1904, it was successful. And the beauty of this is, the underlying reason for this was to provide an industry, a guiding hunting industry for people to come to the island to hunt as a source of income for people on the rock. Well, it worked. In fact, because of their clear cutting and the food supply that was produced for the moose, the population increased. And boy, did it ever. So in Newfie now, they get a population of over 100,000 moose. They kill 20,000 a year. And the beauty of those people is they have a way of saying, come on down and join us. In fact, they say for the government, this is a government statement, they boast 1 license for every 2 moose. How's that? Can you imagine BC doing that? We probably could have done it back in 1958. Anyway, the beauty of this is they don't have any wolves to contend with. They got bears and coyotes, and the bears, the black bears, of course, and they are more of a concern for the caribou that they have on the island. In fact, they still hunt woodland caribou there. Numbers are down, but they kill 12 to 16,000 a year. And of course, in BC, they're on their way out. But in Newfoundland, they still have a population that is another source of meat. But what their biggest threat now is the vehicle collisions. People, moose are dying, and so are people. And vehicles are, the insurance people are, not happy about what's happening over there. But that's how many moose they have. And the people of Newfoundland will not let anybody threaten that wonderful resource that has been created intentionally. This is not an accident. Somebody decided to do this. This is a form of management. But they're really innovators. They have a way of sharing their meat. In Newfoundland, a hunter can take his meat and get it processed as sausage, as we do. But they call it bologna because they were raised on bologna. But this is no bologna. They can take that meat to a supermarket and it can be sold to people who aren't able to hunt. What a wonderful, wonderful idea. I wish if we could only do that, eh? But that's what they're doing there. Okay, we're going to go to the old world for some really interesting stuff. Fennel, Scandinavia. The records there are mind-boggling. Again, I was introduced to this in 1968 and 1969 personally from the people who were doing it in Norway. And I couldn't believe it because then we didn't have the communications that we have now. But they were telling me how they were creating all these moose. Of course, an elk on the side too. And I thought, my God, we're doing the same thing. We're doing all this wonderful clear cutting and forest management. My goodness, we could have the same thing. Well, unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way, but they had a reason for it. I'll just give you, first of all, the explanation was when they went from individual cutting, their forest harvests, to clear cutting, small amounts, the shrub communities increased, the food supply increased, population started to increase. And one thing you have to understand there, at that time in Norway and Sweden, there weren't any bears or wolves because they had a program to make sure there weren't any, and we're going to see that in a minute. But, one of the things they did was to go heavy on harvesting young animals, calves, yearlings. They still call them calves over there because they are. Over here, the moderns call them juveniles, but they're calves. So they hunted calves and yearlings, 2-year-olds, with a few old-timers as well. But the bulk of the harvest was young animals. And that is so important because they're able to maintain a strong reproductive base to keep their meat supplies up, and unbelievable numbers to the extent that they were eating the conifers, okay? And this, again, was a problem. But let's just look at some numbers. For example, the best year in Finno-Scandinavia was 1982, where in Sweden alone, they killed 172,000 moose. Think about that. And in Norway and Finland, add another 100,000, and you're up to 250,000 moose. Okay, now, just imagine, as a biologist, never mind as hunters, hunters don't even worry about it, but as a biologist, a game manager, when I see numbers like this, that you can take 250,000 animals out of a population in the fall, and then next fall, do it again. And then another fall, do it again. Can you imagine? Now I can tell you, that is a lot of success. Anyway, but the fact of the matter is, that's a lot of meat, really a lot of meat, and at $6 US a pound. You do the arithmetic, I tell you, that's money, real money. And it's an important source of income to the landowners. However, the bigger source of income is for the trees themselves. And so there's a balance there, keeping the moose population down so it's not impacting the trees to the extent that they should. So it's a balance between meat and lumber. And they do a tremendous job. Wish we could do the same. Anyway, this was still being practiced not too long ago. But however, things are starting to change, okay? And I can show you why. Have a look. You see this little cluster of black here? Those are cows being eaten by, by wolves and bears. Okay, from about here, though, in 1930, all the way to 1998, there weren't any wolves and bears to eat the cows. In fact, in 1965, in Sweden, the Swedes finally stopped paying their bounty on bears. Now, the bad old days, or these are the new bad old days. This is what's happening now. The wolves and the bears have returned, okay, because of an edict, because of government. In Brussels, the European Union has decreed that wolves and black bears have to be returned to the populations of animals to bring back this harmony that has been lost in all those years. Well, this is what's happening here, but okay, it's happening in the United States too for the same reason. Under the Endangered Species Act, they're bringing the wolves and the bears back. And the wolves now are a serious threat to a way of life, to agriculture and hunting in the US. And all of this is government. Can you believe it? And it's happening here too. So we're not exempt. We've got the same problems, and those problems went back to 1876. So we got a long way to go, but it's doable. We can turn this around if we put our minds to it. Okay, I'm saving the best for last. We're in the Kootenays now. And I got to say, what you're about to see here was something that we've been sitting on for a long, long time. Okay? First of all, it borders on disbelief. We had many more elk in the East Kootenays in the 1980s and 90s than there are now, and for good reason. First, we always had forage, but the elk and the farm ranchers always fought over it. But nevertheless, there was enough to keep enough of our elk going, but we had to feed in the heavy winters, and we did. But from 1975 to 1982, range conditions were improved with coordinated resource management planning. We had a little window of success there, and I think about those wonderful days when we put those plans together and put them to work. Anyway, but forest harvesting also contributed. It was very important. The food supply was a supplement to elk, moose, and deer. But what's really interesting here too, predation was a factor. We had grizzly bears, black bears, cougars, coyotes. They were all a limiting factor, okay, even though they were hunted and trapped. But it wasn't until the late 80s and the early 90s when the wolves returned that things really went into the tank. But the third thing that we did here, and I've got to give Bill and some of the other guys who were working on the program, my good friend Ray. Third, the change in elk management in the Kootenays was a major step in the right direction. But first of all, we decided to actually kill some females, some cows. And this took a bit of selling, but anyway, we did. But it also required determining the population size before and after hunting. But measuring the demographics of game populations for harvesting and monitoring the changes that occur until the next season had to be accurate. And this is critical, accurate and realistically attainable. Age determinations were made by tooth sectioning, and Bill probably sectioned thousands, we know this. And without this precise data, we couldn't describe what we're going to see next. Anyway, the age determinations are made by tooth sectioning. Doing the classified counts is so important, and without it, we wouldn't have any game management that even compares with what we had in the old days. It's just not being done. Anyway, this kind of activity that we were involved in doesn't require counting them all. There are still people out there. I bang my head telling them that they don't have to count them all to figure out how many they can take. You don't have to count all the grains of salt in a salt shaker to figure out how much you got. All you got to do is sample it. And if you take the right sample size when you're working on these animals, that's all you need. This is the work of 18 years of real good elk management. This here, you look at the blue are the bulls, and the red are the cows. These are all adults, no calves. Okay, if you look at the population of bulls, they go right down to about 7 or 8. That's really that's a nice base of adults. If you were looking at an outfitter that wanted more big old timers in the population, they might want to find more of those, and you could do that. You could squeeze some of these guys over with a little bit of sophistication. But if you look at that slope is actually really quite good. But when you look at the cows, spread out into the 20s, okay? And listen, these girls are still productive. In fact, these guys here, these females here, they're the old guard. They're the ones that know the place that they are living in, just like these golfers know this golf course, okay? Anyway, this is a really superb population, and we do not have anything that even resembles this today. It's disgraceful, but this is a credit to the people who did it. We know who they are. They were Bill Workington and Ray DeMarcy. This is their handiwork, really. But the next one is really interesting. This little wedge here, you can't read, the numbers are a little skewed here, but this segment right here is the most interesting one. These are bulls. These are all bulls, and these bulls, if you wish, are like a pie of bulls of different ages. And the ages were carried through for about 18 years. It's a nice average. But this wedge right here is the one that you want to really get your calculators out, okay? This slice here of bulls is 7 years old. 7.83% of this population is 7 years old accurately. We know that, there's no doubt about it. That percentage there represents the 7-year-olds, the maturers, the main breeders, the main guys. And if you take this simple percentage, 7.8%, you can calculate the size of the elk pie. Okay? So get your calculators out. You can do this yourself. Okay, I would like you to enter into your calculator 1,283. Just do it right now. It's just a simple tool. Do it. Okay? And then I want you to divide that number by decimal 0.783. Okay, what's the answer? Louder, Paul.
16,385.
Okay, exactly. That's how many bulls existed in that pie. Okay? Okay, now, if you go back to the previous graph, we're going to make another calculation. Multiply that number by 3. Okay, multiply by 3. Okay, what have we got, Paul? Loud.
About 49,100.
Okay, add 16,353 to that number.
65.5.
That is the population of elk at the very lowest that we had in 1981, 82, 83. The very least. Mind-boggling. Oh, what really bothers me as a game biologist, my God, we missed out on all that meat and all that good hunting. But that's what we had to have in the East Kootenay in 1980, 85, 85. I mean, those years. That's how good it was. Well, I can tell you, now it's a very different story now. So there you go. The good old days. We were hunting them in the good old days. And they were great memories. Okay, now we're going to come to something that's a little more interesting, okay? Okay, when you go to estimate the overall populations, if you look at this information that Bill had gathered even before, and he pulled it all together, you can back check, which is really fascinating. If you go back to 1980, through the early 80s here, and take those same numbers that you've just calculated, and just go back to the year and go up, you're going to get the verifications of those numbers. That's what we had. This is a back check. So anybody that says we didn't have an elk population was dreaming. This is solid stuff. Well, look what's happened now. This is 19 years ago. Well, I can tell you, you all know, it's off the scale. So we got a big job. A big job. Okay, let's look at the other one. Now we're going to do some ifing, if and what. Okay, so what we did was we used a standard based on the number of calves per 100 cows. We've said, okay, every year, this is really simple. In most populations, you always have at least 25 calves per 100 cows. That's as low as you want to get. And we had those values. We had better ones. But we're going to stick with a small number like this, 25 calves per 100 cows, okay? And we're going to make calculations based on that number using 25 bulls per 100 cows. These are all carryover counts, that's right. Okay, you always start from the bottom. That's the baseline, okay? So at these numbers, you can see where we are. Now at 25, the number of calves is very similar to the number of bulls. But again, it's just under 20. If you go to they add up. Okay, they're very close. Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay, 33, that's essentially one bull, 3 cows. Again, you see, it shows a very similar trend. It's not that different. Okay, let's go to the next one. Go to 50. We don't ever have records. I can't imagine an elk or a moose population in BC, the way we manage them, of ever having a population where we had 1 bull to 2 cows. It just didn't happen. We didn't have them. We've got people who honestly believe that you can still maintain an elk population with one bull for 25 cows. Yes, and I just can't believe this. But if you get anything lower, it's artificial insemination to keep a population going. But this is the stuff that we have had in drawers sitting in the Fish and Wildlife Branch offices for years. And most of the people who were responsible for managing our game weren't even believing this information existed. I'm so pleased that we're able to present this because it's been sitting in a drawer for all this time, okay? Anyway, the problem is now we've got our grizzly bears back in spades and the wolves are having a feast. The wolves are having a field day. And unless we can deal with them, it's going to be very difficult for us to turn it around. But we have another problem. We have unregulated hunting in British Columbia, and in some places it's very serious. And so if you've got unregulated hunting, it's just like wolves. The wolves are unregulated, and they kill whatever they want, wherever they have to, and unregulated hunting is the same. So until we can deal with both, we're going to have a real tough time of turning things around. But that's what we have to do. And so what we're doing here in the Kootenay Wildlife Heritage Fund, you guys are doing, you're starting with at least trying to acquire the important lands, the most important lands, the most productive lands that are in the trench to make that possible. But we've got two other things that we've got to work on. We've got to be able to feed, especially in winter, and we've got to be able to get rid of the wolves, and we got to knock those bears down. We got to go back to the good old days of managing animals, not just pretending they're something that we should just enjoy as part of nature's bounty, if you wish. But again, let's go to the references, please. Okay. This was for me, this was a revelation. I knew that in Fenno-Scandinavia, there was a whole lot of stuff that went on here, especially the fact that in Sweden in 1965, they stopped paying bounties on brown bears. Can you imagine paying bounties on grizzly bears? But that's what they did in Sweden. And they did it for good reason. They had to eat, okay? It was about looking after the cows and the sheep. Well, this paper is incredible, and I would urge all of you to take it. It's easy. Just go to the website and bring it up. Some of the pictures are outstanding. And the graph that I presented here is only one of 5. In fact, the other graphs show the number of wolves and the bears that were killed. Okay? And you're going to end up with the same diaspora. But I wanted to show the important part for me was to show what happens when you get rid of the predators, what happens to the livestock, and of course, the elk and the moose and the deer. But this is a really interesting paper. It's this one here by Henry Buller tells the story. He explains. And this paper was in 2008. But he's published other material, and what he is describing are the social changes, the attitudinal changes, where people are becoming more, I guess, interested in, I hate to use the term nature, but that's not what it is, but being more considerate to other animals, even domestic animals. It's about attitude changes in contemporary populations, attitude changes towards even domestic animals, wild and domestic animals. That's a good one. I would recommend that, because unless you understand the people who you're trying to either convert or at least educate, unless you understand their thoughts and their attitudes and values, it's really difficult. But Henry Buller does an excellent job of presenting it, and I would urge you all to do it. And of course, this is really fascinating. When you go to Norway, you get statistics on their ptarmigan, you get everything. And if you see that, you're just going to say, well, why the hell can't we do it here? But this one right here is a newbie. And I want you to see this phrase here. You see adaptive management. Adaptive management is a new buzzword. These are the enhancers. They're enhancing opportunities for whoever, hunters, trappers, whatever. This is the new language that is being used to explain what's happening to us. And this young fellow, Tyler Stephen Trump, I don't think he's related to the big man, but anyway, this thesis here that he's just done is really, I wouldn't even consider thinking about adapting his management to the situation we have here. But this is the new thinking, and this is coming out of our universities. This is the new thinking, but really it's not. This stuff is whimsy and it's wishful thinking. And what's really sad about this is that most of these are nothing more than suppositions, theses, or theories that need testing. And of course, when they're testing them and they fail, they say, well, I guess we just didn't try hard enough. We've got to do it better. But that's what's happening.
1 moment.
I'm sorry. But no, this is what's coming now. And this is going to make it even harder for us. The mess, yeah, so I would really urge you all to, I have a list about that long, but I boiled it down to these for 2 reasons. Because of the information that's available, the history that tells us what we used to have and what we used to do, and what we're doing now. All of it is contrasting. And then if you put Henry's comments together with what's happening now, you get a really good understanding of what we're facing as people who want to continue hunting, and believe it or not, actually raising livestock. This stuff is so impacting on us, and it sneaks up on you. It's pernicious. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a generation or 2, and when it finally catches up to you, you realize that you're a casualty. But this is where we are. Anyway, I just want to leave it with you. We have got some really fantastic information up here for you to read and think about. Please do, because it saddens me to even drive south by Parson today to see that place. It looks like it's all boarded up. So it bothers me. And one more story. In 1984, Dave Malenka and I were having breakfast at the Husky. It was dark. And the first loads of logs were coming in. The boys go to work early here. And finally, the sun was just starting to come up, and we had to go to Parson to a meeting. And some folks said to me, well, we better go, Ken. So we got in the truck and we started. And when we got by Mike Momberg's place on the farm, on the road north, by the time we hit Bummers Flats, we were never out of sight of elk, except for a few little strips where there's too much timber. We were never out of sight of elk, all the way to Radium. And then when we left Radium, it was like that to Edgewater and then to Briscoe. And once we got to, I would say, Spilly, things started to taper off. We weren't seeing the numbers. There were so many elk you couldn't count them. If you stopped, you would have had trouble counting them. That was in March 1984. So we know what the good old days were like, but they aren't like that now, and we know why. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. There you go.